So in this video, we're going to be applying the inheritance guidance we learned about in the previous video to our Quill project. I'm going to go grab the body, add our curly brackets, and let's start adding in our global font styles. The first one I'm going to put in here is the font family. I'm just going to copy it from here and paste it in the body. Now, because I'm defining it on the body, which means that all child text elements will inherit this, I'm now actually going to remove it from any other location we're defining this to avoid duplicate declarations. So I'm going to remove it from here, and we also have it on our paragraph anchor and small text. And I also have it down here on our BTN class. So I'm going to go remove it over here as well. Now, in a previous video, I did speak about explicitly defining some properties on the BTN class, so it's clear the properties being used in our buttons. However, now that we've learnt about inheritance, the best practice is we define our global base font styles on the body. So something like font family is just applied to every single property. So there's no need to explicitly define font family on the button as well. So in doing this, we've now consolidated our font family property onto the body, which is being applied to all text properties through inheritance. The other properties I'm going to be adding, I'm going to go grab down here. I'm going to copy these and paste them inside our body. Now, the reason I'm selecting a font weight of 400, a line height of 1.5, and our base gray color is because those are the default text properties I want. As we've seen, they're used on elements like paragraphs, anchor tags, smaller text, etc. I kind of see these elements as a bit more commonly used throughout the application, whereas headings are a bit more specialist. So that's why I want to use these properties as my default properties. So I'm going to scroll back down here and simply remove this now. Now I could also remove the font weight of 400 in our button class, because that's now set on our body tag. And through inheritance, our anchor tag will get applied the style. However, with a component like a button, it actually is still good practice to keep the font weight explicitly defined here. That's because something like a font weight on a button could be different. You could have a 500, 600, or 700 value here. So it is always a good idea to explicitly define the font weight, even if it is the same as the font weight in your body tag. As I mentioned before, something like font family, you don't need to explicitly define in your button, because in this application, all the text elements have the same font family. So by default, all our text properties will now inherit these styles. So if you remember from the previous video, once we define our base text properties on the body, we next go and set global font styles on type selectors. We've actually already done this. We have our default styling inside the body, and then we have specific styling on type selectors. For the font weight, we're setting it as 700, which will override this 400. The line height as 1.2, which will override this line height. This darker shade of gray, which will override this color. And we're also adding a new property on, the letter spacing of -2 pixels. And again, the reason these are overriding is because properties through inheritance have a very low specificity, and the type selector has a higher specificity. So these properties will override inherited properties. And then of course we're selecting each heading and applying its unique properties, like font size. Now, if you remember from the last video, we saw the power of applying text align on container elements, where it centers both inline and block elements. So let's now go and use this to our advantage inside the Quill project. With the hero section, it would be nice to center all of this content instead of just the H1. The feature section we're going to leave as it is, because that final layout has this content on the left with images on the right. The call to action section containing this heading and this anchor tag would also be nice to center, and the entire footer would also be great to center. So let's now code this up inside VS Code. I'm back inside the index.html file for our Quill project. I'm going to scroll down to the hero section and add in a class and give it the value hero section. I'm going to scroll down to the CTA section and give this a class of CTA section. And for the footer, I'm going to give this a class of footer. Now, of course, I could use the type selector in CSS and not add a class, but this is generally considered better practice. So heading over to app.css, I'm going to add the hero section class, grab the curly brackets, and add the property text align center. I'll do the same thing with the CTA section, and the same thing with the footer. So let's check this out in the browser. So you can see now that our hero section is all nice and centered. Same thing with our call to action section, and same thing with our footer. Now, just a few comments at this point. The first is, this does work, using text-align center on a parent element to center all the children. And once again, like we've discussed, even the inline elements are centered, like the anchor tag over here or images over here. Later on, we'll be talking about Flexbox, which is the more modern way of handling alignment. So while this does work, later on in the CSS module, we will be exploring new modern and advanced methods. The next thing I want to comment is that these links over here and these images are actually a little bit off center. If you compare it to this text over here, you can see that the center line kind of comes down here to the right. If I go to DevTools and hover over this paragraph text here, you can see the blue box extends the full width of the page. Whereas over here, the list item has a little bit of space on the left here, which when I hover over it goes green. This has to do with the CSS box model, and we'll be correcting this in the next topic. But I just wanted to point that out now, in case you were wondering why this looks a bit funny down here. Before we finish up, I just want to tidy up our CSS file a bit. The first thing I want to do is remove text align where we no longer need it. I'm going to scroll up, and I'm going to remove text align on our H1, as we're now handling that with inheritance on the parent element. We had also previously defined text align center on our H2. In our HTML, the H2 is used as a heading for each section. For example, the feature section has an H2, and the call to action section has an H2. The H2 over here is now being centered through inheritance that we defined over here. So if I remove text align center from this H2, the H2 in the call to action section will still be centered, but the H2 in the feature section will no longer be centered. It generally isn't a good idea to have a text align center set as a global style like this on an H2, because not all H2s will be aligned center, whereas all H2s will be 48 pixels. So to correct this, I'm going to delete the text align property here, and I'm going to add a new class to this H2. We'll call it features main heading. Scrolling down in the CSS file, we'll add the class features main heading, and we'll give it the text align property of center. So this is much better. I'm now just centering this heading for this particular instance, instead of globally using the H2 type selector. Let's check this out in the browser. So as expected, there's no actual net change. The heading 2 is still centered here, which is being controlled by this. And the heading 2 over here is also being centered, which is being controlled by inheritance over here. Okay, the last thing I want to do is just tidy the CSS document itself up a bit. You may be noticing things are now getting a little bit out of hand. We need some better structure to organize this. So what I'm going to do is split up the CSS document into 3 main sections. I'm going to add a comment by hitting Command/ on my Mac, add a whole bunch of dashes, and give this the title Global Styles. I'll copy these dashes on the other end as well. I'm just going to copy this entire comment as well, as I'll be using this syntax as a title below. So all these styles below are global styles. They're setting things like the font size of all H1s, or all the text properties on the body that are being inherited. The next series of styles I'm going to call components. These are pieces of reusable UI we're going to be using throughout the application. The button is a great example of a component. The next section is going to be called sections. These are different sections of our web page. And I'm going to put it in order as it appears on the page. I'm going to add a comment, and this time I'm only going to add a few dashes to make it appear as a subheading of sections. The first section with specific styling for is the hero section. I'll copy this for the next section, which is the features section. That's this piece of code over here. I'm going to cut that and pop it above over here. The next section we have is the CTA section, and the next section is the footer. So using comments to create headings like this helps better structure our CSS file. Where we first have all our global styles, our different components, which we're going to be adding to as we move through the course, and different sections of the page. We'll also be adding a whole bunch of new CSS rules. You're smashing it. Click here to move on to the next video in the playlist, and click here to subscribe to the channel to get updates on new releases.